So welcome everybody to the GIMI Think Tank. As you know, every week on Wednesdays, we use this powerful platform to introduce interesting speakers who are talking about innovation state of a country, a trend, an innovation management tool, basically, or any GIMI program which are running around the world. So today we have our certified training partner from Nigeria, who is Dr. Akin. So I'm very glad to have Dr. Akin today, and this is like a introduction. He joined our network last year, but this is like, say, the first introduction with the community of GIMI. And we have the pleasure to hear today about Nigeria's thriving innovation scene. So it's an opportunity to know a little bit more about one of the biggest countries in Africa, Nigeria. Dr. Akin basically is an innovation strategy leadership expert. He is the founder of Easy Data Consulting, basically, and Leadership Express. He holds a PhD in leadership from university in US. He holds an MBA. He has written a book. His consulting career has been in several firms like Adam Smith, International, Atos Consulting, National Government Strategies, etc. He helps companies to develop internal ecosystems to innovate effectively. His expertise basically is deployed as innovation leadership coach and management strategist. So he offers advisory services to a wide range of clients globally. We had the pleasure today, Dr. Akin, so the floor is yours. If you want to add a little bit more on the introduction, I did. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. And you will have like 25-30 minutes a speech, and then we'll have Q&A from the rest of the audience.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rila. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me clear?
Yep.
Great. So good morning to you and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria. And as Arila said, I have quite some experience supporting organizations to improve their ecosystems, particularly with innovation strategy development. And it's been a good experience getting involved with GIMI in the last couple of months, and so become the GIMI country training partner for Nigeria. But today I want to talk about Nigeria. And share a few things with you in terms of what a dynamic innovation ecosystem we have, particularly in the tech ecosystem arena. I don't know if I'm able to share my screen. I want to go through the presentation. Okay.
Yes, we see your screen.
Okay, great. So Nigeria is an interesting country that's popular for a number of things. But a few facts about Nigeria, and for most of us on this call, you probably have encountered a Nigerian, because 1 out of every 4 African or persons of African descent that you see who's come from the continent will be a Nigerian. It's the largest country on the continent. Our recent estimate says we're about 217 million and pushing on 250, 300 million by 2050. That's what the experts are telling us. It's a very young country in terms of demographics. We have the average age at about 18 years. And our GDP is, well, we did some recalibration. We used to be the largest economy in Africa, but because of the current foreign exchange crisis and recalibrations going on, I think probably we are now behind South Africa. And so that puts our GDP at about 1.1 trillion. In terms of the Global Innovation Index ranking, now this does not tell all of the story about the innovations that happens in Nigeria. And as probably some of us know, WIPRO, that's the World Intellectual Property Organization, ranks countries on the basis of how innovative they are and what comes out of them in terms of new ideas and inventions. But for us in Nigeria, we tend to take this not so seriously because the scene and the amount of innovative energy that's available to us seems to suggest we should be doing much better than what we produce. And I'll come to that in a bit. I've also singled out the ease of doing business. And I'll come to why this is important, because at the moment we are really not there. 131 out of a basket of maybe 170, 75 countries, okay? But in terms of our technology innovation ecosystem, three things are driving innovation in Nigeria. The first thing is that you have a huge population and a huge challenge to solve social problems, needs that needs to be addressed. And for us innovators, understanding what needs to be addressed is a critical element of sustainable innovation. It's also a country that's filled with people with a very strong entrepreneurial spirit. We love to innovate. We love to express our creativity in different ways. I'm sure most people who've probably encountered Nigeria will think about our football. We think sometimes about our movies. And it's a very diverse country with different shades and sizes in terms of how people and cultures and languages interact. So just so you know, we've got over 250 languages being spoken in Nigeria, one country. And so a lot of these cultural factors are at play when you look at the level of creativity and innovation that happens in Nigeria. What are the key ecosystem players that are offering us the right kind of support to bring out the ecosystem changes that I'm going to be talking about? We have startups that I'm going to talk a lot about. We have a number of government entities and government interventions that are helping us to drive innovation in Nigeria, as well as the elements from corporate Nigeria that are driving this ecosystem change that we see. So, like I said, I want to focus a lot on the startup ecosystem because that's where the engine of innovation growth in Nigeria seems to be coming from at the moment. Currently, we have well over 3,000 startups active in Nigeria, and this is data from 2022 August. It's probably higher than that. These startups, about 300 of them, between 2015 and 2022, have received funding both within and outside Nigeria to the tune of $2 billion. And this is the highest in Africa. In fact, the Nigerian tech startup ecosystem is the biggest in Africa by far. The key startup cities and corridors in Nigeria, where all of this activity is being driven, would be the major cities in the different parts of the country. Lagos, very popular, is our commercial capital, city of well over 20+ million people. Abuja, where I'm based, comes as a distant second, really, and we'll see the numbers later. In terms of the global startup ecosystem, we are number 64 in Nigeria. Currently, these startups are being supported by a number of established incubators and accelerators. Well over 23 of them are well established and driving this innovation that we see. A total of maybe 600+ entities, both locally and internationally, have been driving equity investments into the country's tech startup space. And you see a representation of some of the tech startups that we have at play in Nigeria. Where are they innovating? Most of them, of course, are in the fintech space. Now, if you remember my first slide, I talked about the population and I talked about the need. Financial inclusion is probably at its lowest in Nigeria before we had this explosion of fintechs. And so bringing a lot of people back into the financial ecosystem, as it were, was one area and still remains a big area for innovation in Nigeria. At the moment, we have about 173 fintechs, driving this change. But the other areas that are also showing promise would be e-commerce and e-retailing, e-health, and so on. So why is this so? Fintech is big in Africa. And as you see in the graph by Statista, Sub-Saharan Africa by far plays the biggest game in fintech globally, at least as at this data that was produced in 2020. And where is this happening? Nigeria seems to be taking the lead there because we have quite a number of unicorns are startups that have built values over $1 billion. And based on latest data that I could lay my hands on as of February of 2023, you could see that in that top 7, Nigeria has 4 of these fintechs. So who are these fintechs driving the tech ecosystem in Nigeria? InterSwitch, Flutterwave, Paystack. Each of these companies are valued at well over $1 billion, right? The second element of the innovation ecosystem in Nigeria is the support that you get from government entities. The Nigerian government has been active in the last couple of years to wake up to the reality that the innovation that's coming from the digital economy is significant. And so, as at last year, there was a dedicated act for supporting startups, which included a number of instruments around setting up a startup fund, setting up a council, and pushing forward the boundaries of what tech startups can do in terms of even solving social problems. So the opportunities and the space for innovation is huge. The third element is the corporate Nigeria. Corporate Nigeria is also responding to the innovations from the tech space. Innovations that are helping organizations to deliver more efficiently and more effectively. And so in terms of ag tech, insurtech, all these other areas are impacting on traditional modes of running the value chains in the industries that currently exists. And so there's a network of incubators, accelerators, and venture capital firms, some of them represented here. Again, they are aggregating in what I call regional innovation corridors. These corridors exist all over Nigeria, but there are 3 or 4 big ones that are driving. So the Lagos corridor, Southwest corridor is there. There's a Southeast corridor around Aba, Port Harcourt. And there is a northern corridor, which is the one between Abuja, Kaduna, Kano. And these corridors are being integrated, driven primarily by private sector entities, but they are integrating to collaborate a lot more. And of course, the third element, which is the entrepreneurial spirit, trying to find solutions where there is a need to innovate. So what are the challenges that have been faced by the tech ecosystem and the innovation ecosystem as a whole? Nigeria continues to suffer significant infrastructural gaps. And when I say that, I mean, even though we now have good mobile penetration, I think is pushing on now 70% mobile penetration in the country, we still have significant gaps in transport networks, train networks, as well as broadband access in the country. Regulatory challenges in terms of classifying organizations that are pushing the boundaries of innovation and using innovative techniques to deliver goods and services. And there is a talent gap. That in itself tells us that there's a lot that can be done in terms of key opportunities for innovators and innovation to expand. The first element where I see opportunity for innovation is in blockchain and cryptocurrency technologies. Now, Nigeria is the biggest cryptocurrency market in Africa. I think last year, the data that I have says $57 billion worth of transactions was consummated. And why is this so? This is because a lot of young people are moving to edge the inflation rate in Nigeria, and so they're moving their assets into crypto. The government responded to that by creating its own cryptocurrency and the e-Naira, as it's called. And I think we are probably one of the first 5 countries that have done that. So innovation in that space is going to be critical to the next level of growth that the innovation ecosystem, particularly the tech ecosystem, would have. And also, there's significant opportunity for global cooperation and collaboration. Big tech, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, they're always in and out of Nigeria, particularly in Lagos, where they have visible presence. And so the innovation landscape will continue to grow. That's my view. In terms of the sectors that will drive innovation going forward, I believe that there's a space for social innovation because of the nature of what they call wicked problems that Nigeria still has to deal with. And this would be something that the young and vibrant Nigerian population would need innovation around. And definitely, as long as products and services have been delivered, there will be value creation or at a huge level. So I'm going to stop here because I believe this is a light touch to provide some context to what kind of innovations are happening in Nigeria. And I'm going to take comments or questions. I hope that's been useful. Thank you. Over to you, Arila.
Akin, thank you for being on this presentation. I think this presentation is very insightful for all of us. And often the information that we hear is a lot about what's going on in Boston or what's going on in Munich or what's going on in Singapore or Dubai. And people don't understand that this is one of the biggest opportunity on the planet. 1 out of 4 Africans is a Nigerian, or the average demographics of Africa is an emerging young population. They all have access to phones. They all have access to technology. And the world's getting flat very quickly to a large extent. And also at the same time, Africa still has wicked problems, as you said very nicely. The wicked problems to solve in Africa, right? So all that put together creates an opportunity for those who are brave and courageous from internationally to say, why am I not looking at Africa in the same way as I should have looked at China when China was emerging? Why am I not looking at Africa as a market as much as a place for talent, right? All those things are in place. So maybe let's begin that without a doubt that there seems to be an emergence of Africa. And when Adi and I were at Monitor, we had a futurist who said, is this the century for Africa? And there was always this ambiguity and uncertainty about why it will make it and then why it might not make it. So that's the first thing I would like to kind of calm the populations listening in. What's your confidence that this is the time for Africa, politically, socially, economically, technologically, and all the things that we talk about that influences where to invest next, where to partner next?
Okay. I lost a bit of your comments towards the end, but I think what I heard was that where is the confidence to, prospect in Africa?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I used to say to people that I'm an incurable optimist about Africa and about Nigeria. And I say that because if you notice in my presentation, I kept mentioning the entrepreneurial spirit of Nigeria. I think I can, without any doubt, say that Africa is going to emerge because unlike in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where communication was almost non-existent between the average African and the rest of the world. That's not the case now. Something happens on the New York Stock Exchange, everybody in Nigeria knows who is tuned to it. Like you said, with the phones in people's hands, there is no limit to what's possible. And because it's a young population that is not as illiterate as the population of the 50s and 60s and 70s, they are finding innovative ways to sidestep the traditional barriers. And I'll give you an example. And I mentioned this in the presentation. Why are more Nigerians being driven to cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology? Two things. One, because they want to avoid inefficiencies of government and corruption. I didn't mention the C word, but it's there, right? Two, trust. We pay what I call the trust tax in Africa for every transaction. Blockchain is going to eliminate that to a large extent and is going to make it easy for people to transact across borders. And Africa is pushing that. When you look at the Africa Transcontinental Trade Agreement that has just been signed 2 years ago, so that's trying to implement, to create a borderless Africa. A borderless Africa is looking at 1.2 billion people. That's a massive market. And I already see trends where a lot of Chinese and Indian companies are relocating to the continent to take advantage of the tariff-free zone that's going to come up in the coming years. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But it's still us playing the probability game that we will have a decent number of leaders who will be switched on correctly. We will have a good number of people across the big economies, South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Morocco, and so on, who will understand the game, the global geopolitical game that needs to be played. And don't forget that if the issues in Europe, for instance, and the emerging one in the Middle East do not go away quickly, then attention will be focused on Africa a bit more in a different way. So I think there's reason to be optimistic, cautious optimism, but there are already green shoots that can be tapped into in terms of how Africa emerges out of all of this.
Akin, one of the things that I observed in my experience in the United States has been driving technology to a large extent globally. So whatever happens in the United States, eventually our technologies that are used everywhere. And in the 70s and 80s, Motorola, IBM, GE had management which were white or Europeans. And so when they talked about centers of excellence, they would put them in Europe because that was the heritage they came from. And then in the 90s and 2000s, you suddenly saw a lot of Indians begin to emerge in senior level positions in those technology companies. And the center of technologies then were being relocated in India because of the diaspora of these people. Today, in my experience, even when I was working at Motorola, we saw the emergence of Nigerians and African PhDs and scientists coming everywhere. And even my son was applying to a college in Northwestern University for a PhD program. The PhD professor is a Nigerian descended person. Do you see the diaspora of Nigerians in where the technology is often developed, reconnecting back to Africa as a way for ideas to move, people to move, and even money to move, to create that FDI and also the market and whatever? So just a question, your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I'll start from where you stopped. The money is moving already. And I mean, you look at the economies of most of the African countries. Nigeria, I can talk to 100%. In the last 5 years, diaspora remittances have become a significant part of the income of the country. And it's not stopping, okay? And once the money starts to move back, initially it's to support old people and to keep people running. Now it's creating opportunity in Nigeria for Nigerians. And I say that, and I'll give you an example. So there's Flutterwave. Flutterwave is probably one of the biggest fintechs. You can look it up. Once they start to launch and scale, most of these startups, fintechs, then go to register in the United States. And once they win the rounds of funding, they bring the money back to the continent. That's what Flutterwave has done. So it has expanded not just in Nigeria, but to Kenya and Ghana. So you see that once the money flows back that way, improves the quality of talent, and definitely, like they say, where your money is, your art is there, your mouth is, right? I just see that happening. It's a matter of time. And just to buttress what you said, you look at key companies, the countries and governments in the Northern Hemisphere. Nigerians, people of Nigerian descent are emerging also, like you had the Rishi Sunak moment in the UK. His Secretary of Trade or whatever, the lady grew up in Lagos. The Secretary of Commerce, I think, or Trade in the United States is also of Nigerian descent, Wale Adeyemo. So, and currently in Canada, I think Manitoba, the Deputy Premier, is also of Nigerian descent. These guys are always commenting about Nigeria, and they will at some point. I see that's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. Like I said, it's not if. There will be a groundswell at some point that drives change back inwards. So the question is, how long that's going to take? I don't know. The jury is out on that, but it's happening because the money is coming back and they will want to use the money to influence what's happening on the continent. It's just a question of time.
Akin, just a side note, when we were working at Arthur D. Little, as well as a Monitor Group, we would take the diaspora of any country who's trying to drive economic growth and bring them together for an event with golf and dinner and say, what are you guys going to do for your country? And we did that for Puerto Rico, and we found the managers who were in high positions to Puerto Rico to do that. We did that in Mexico with the Mexican diaspora. And these guys are ultimately, it's not thousands, millions of people needed. It's really 1,000 people needed to move those things because they're in the power positions with the right knowledge centers and the money centers. Let me switch to another question. I encourage people to come up with questions also in the chat if possible. If they got their hands up, I'll take your questions. Akin, one other thing I want to say is when we saw rapid technology evolution, whether in Europe or in South America, what we saw, let's say during the dot-com period, was there was a company in Germany which would find all the startups that formed in the US. And it immediately created a copycat for Europeans companies which had regulation barriers that Americans couldn't come over to Europe easily with. And the same thing happened later, about 5 years to 8 years later in South America and Brazil, where they started focusing on saying what's going on in the US, and we create a copycat, and then it can get acquired perhaps later on at some ready stage, or it can grow on its own because of the barriers to entry of regulation. Are you seeing some sort of strategies like that evolving on rapidly creating the next big breakthrough companies? And how long does it take to even replicate some of these ideas like Uber and a Nigerian Uber, Airbnb and a Nigerian Airbnb, similar kind of things? How fast are those things happening now?
It's happening already. So there are a number of ride-hailing apps, but not necessarily for cars. I think I saw the one for motorcycles that came from India. So there's this tuk-tuk, they call them in India. And this company moved into Nigeria and worked with, because the tuk-tuk model wasn't really as well accepted in the economy. They went for bicycles, motorcycles. And so they started, you could hail a motorcycle with the app, came from India. And when the state government, I think in Lagos, banned the use of commercial motorcycles, they switched to deliveries. And the company is still in Lagos and is still, thriving. So yes, that is very, very true, that the market speaks to its counterpart and tries to adjust to what the context requires. So you've got an Uber that's more, Uber is here, yes, but there are also local variants of it. And the local variant, I think, is the transport union here initially fought off Uber, like they did, the cab drivers in London also did, right? So what they've done is to take the idea of a Uber and translate it into their world. So they already had the unions, they had the drivers, they had the cabs. And so they've created an app so that the local taxis can be called off your phone with an app, but it's not Uber. And they're doing that. So that's happening already. It's just contextualizing it to make sure that it runs on the infrastructure that's available, but it's happening.
Got it. One of the things that we've seen in countries like India and even China, but more so India, is they came up with their own way to innovate. And they basically said, look, we got a lot of poor people. And because of poverty and all that, we got to find a new innovation. They call it Jugaad innovation, which was low-cost innovation, cheap innovation. And the idea is that if you can serve the low bottom of the pyramid, you can always step up. But if somebody's standing up at the top of the pyramid, they can never step down. And so the price umbrella by the bigger thing allows you to play at the bottom and climb upwards. And so Reliance, as an example, in India, is able to serve millions of people at some ridiculous, like $1 to $5 a month rate for providing service. Because they've thought about ways to do this low cost. But in the United States, you would say impossible, right? So do you see Nigeria as a special case in terms of its market and its evil, what do you say, big problems? I don't know, you use a very specific word.
Wicked
so
problems.
unique. Yeah, that's it. Which are so special that it will create and drive innovation of new ways of thinking and different ways of thinking that can then scale out of Nigeria to the rest of the world.
Clearly, yes, there are opportunities for that. A couple of years ago, I was talking to a gentleman in the Netherlands who runs a center called Center for Frugal Innovations in Africa.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting that what you mentioned, I've seen traces of it, particularly with the big manufacturing companies who are, because of the economic situation, going for miniature sizes in their products. And now I find insurance companies, I think one of the insurance companies that I was talking to earlier last year are beginning to think of chopping up their premiums into bite sizes and creating an app where people can pull in and buy insurance in bulk. So it's not launched yet. I'm not sure it's launched, but I hear that's also something that the market is likely to come up with. I suspect that the way Nigeria might go, particularly with what currently the fintech guys are doing, is to scale from Nigeria first into the continent. And the prime suspects for us, once they start, is Ghana, Kenya, South Africa. Ghana, Kenya, because they seem to have the same level of infrastructure challenge that Nigeria has. South Africa is slightly ahead. The North Africans are much more ahead in terms of managing the infrastructure problems that Nigeria still deals with. So, and that seems to be the trajectory for most of these tech innovations that are coming out. The first trial out or the borrow from Ghana. So something coming out of Ghana, Kenya, they also borrow in and do. But they are coming out with local solutions that can still work in those contexts, rather than the ones that probably might scale in North America or Europe, except for solving, like you usually say, universal needs.
Good. Thanks for the pitch on basic human needs as part of the innovation methodologies of GIMI. But absolutely. Akin, as you look at Nigeria and the trajectory it's on, one of the ways we from the US would think about putting an office in another country or expanding into another country because we are optimistic about the market or what the talent pool and everything else is the airport. And let me simplify it. We check American Airlines. Does American Airlines fly to that city? So when we look at Colombia, we say, where does American Airlines fly? They go fly to Bogota and they fly to Barranquilla. And they have a few flights to maybe Cali. So you know your office should be in one of those three cities. Because American Airlines has done the research already for the traffic of people moving back and forth and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very simple proxy for saying how well are your cities growing or not growing. So my question first is, as you look at the large cities of Nigeria, Lagos and others, which cities are emerging as the cities where there is lots of travel within Nigeria, but also international countries who have signed contracts to say we want to partner with you? Which countries are having direct flights, which tells us also to a large extent where the partnerships are?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, Lagos, I think the whole world arrives and leaves from Lagos. So Delta, I think, flies directly non-stop to Atlanta, I think, from Lagos. And I think it's daily. Of course, UK are traditional colonial, so multiple flights from London. And then because of the trade with China, there are also flights coming in and out of China from Lagos and Abuja, as well as I think Enugu and Onitsha. So there are significant movements to the east, to China, to India, and all those places. And as far as the West is concerned, it's Abuja, Lagos for the US and Europe. Lufthansa comes every day. I think Air France comes every day to both Lagos and Abuja and Port Harcourt. We've had our issues now with Emirates. Dubai used to be the stomping ground of Nigeria's reach until COVID and some of the political mess that we had with them. And I think that was not been helped by the fact that the last government just held on to airfares. And so there's a backlog that this new administration is trying to clear of fares that the government has not remitted. But Dubai used to be, I mean, every day, the flights as well. So we're well connected in that sense, if you ask me. And of course, there are flights to all African countries. So we've got local carriers that also fly out to these countries on a daily basis. So there's one of Nigeria's airlines that goes almost everywhere, particularly in this Southeast Asian region, because of the trade with China. And China continues to supply us like it supplies everywhere in the world with what people need. Okay, so, but America is connected to Lagos, non-stop flight from Lagos to Atlanta every day. Europe is well connected.
Let me just summarize for everybody listening in. Nigeria is connected. And if you want to move within Nigeria, there are airports to move around. Nigeria is a big country, very big country. Most people don't realize how big it is. That's another part, right? But it also is connected to all the African countries which are strategic for Nigeria, which are also indicative of potential markets for expansion, right? And also connected to Europe and the US colonial history, as well as the new diaspora of Nigerians which are there with who are working there, remittance and all that stuff. We have Brett. Brett, you have a question that you would like to ask, or are you ready to ask a question?
Hi, Akin. Good to see you.
Good to see you again.
Yes. So I have that's a little bit of a, take it in the spirit with which it's offered. I think the thing that's still holding Africa back is stability, not as much so in Nigeria as some of the surrounding countries. And I think the ANC has had a real problem with creating corporate governance across the continent. How's Nigeria trying to lead in that, because you did mention that there's still problems with the government and stuff. You know, I can tell you 15 years ago when I was working with the UAE government, I told them, you know, you should be the New York of Africa. You know, all the financial transactions, everything kind of going through there. They ignored me. And so China has the biggest influence on Africa now, which so you know, how do you feel about the stability, the governance on the continent? Is Nigeria ready to step up and be the leader of governance in on the continent? Because it's sorely needed, and that's probably the biggest thing that's holding back the continent at the moment.
Yeah, I cannot agree less with you that the continent, particularly the sub-Saharan Africa, needs that leadership. Can Nigeria do that? On the face of current realities,
Maybe.
it's tough.
Yeah.
And I'm being very honest here, because a few decades ago, I could stand here and tell you, yes, we will, because, you know, when they had all the civil wars in Liberia and so on, Nigeria went in there and sorted them out. Now we've got this nasty business with Boko Haram in the north that Nigeria has been unable to fix for almost 20 years. That is the only reason I'm saying to you, come see, come sa. And now we have a band on top of us. All of the Sahel countries have gone south, back to the military. And they are also running into the arms of Russia. Yeah. So that makes all of the northern belt or the Sahel belt difficult to predict in terms of what's coming. Okay. And we tried to, you know, do the strong arm Nigeria a few months ago. I don't know if you were following the news when Niger had its coup, and we were soundly rebuffed. So it's a bit tricky, but I feel that if we go through the next 2-3 years and come out of the economic challenges and economic opportunities, there will be less enticement for radicalism, particularly the young people in the north. If we can put a lead on Boko Haram and its variants, then we might have a chance to lead Africa again, as we ought to.
Good.
Yeah, but those are big ifs.
Ian, let me double click on Brett's question. I think from the US perspective, and probably from many countries, particularly Europe, perhaps they often think Africa can change just like that. Leadership can change its governance, and even some of the rules will change. But you emphasize that blockchain and other things will come. We can provide increased trust. So at the end of the day, maybe there's a new way to get trust established to be able to do business, and confidence of payments, confidence of supply chain or whatever. So do you see, because even governments are going to change, government 4.0. And I'm going to just pause and just highlight the point. Ian Bremmer, he talks about where the world is going next all the time. He's a really great futurist about the economy and everything else. And he was saying that no longer will it be the United States and Russia and Europe dictating the rules of governance. It's going to be corporate technology companies. And the technology companies will allow for ideas to exchange, services to exchange digitally, and they will put governance in there to make sure everything is safe and trusted. If you provide a service, you'll get paid. If you need some sort of technology, it'll be all in place. And so the government's slowly being pushed out where there might be corruption on one side, and people who are bad are slowly pushed out because they are kind of locked in the technology, the trust. So I'm kind of interested in saying, is there forget the government at the end of the day, the entrepreneurs who went to the United States in the early 19th century made it big. The entrepreneurs who could enter into Africa today and China, they made it big. At the time where there was instability, complexity, low trust, where you carried a gun in the US just to make sure the rules were followed in case it didn't work for you. All that thing slowly came about into a new trust system. So again, I would like to understand your thoughts that will Africa develop a new, or be the first to embrace a new trust system? Because it needs it. It needs it.
Okay, so just to backtrack a bit, and I was reading an article earlier this week on the World Economic Forum, research saying more people in the world now trust their business leaders than they trust government leaders. Yeah, that's the latest thing that's going on. And so Davos, they're thinking now, so how can we get business leaders to stay straight and not lead us astray? Now I'll bring that so I'll bring that back, and I'm saying that because of what you said. So I'm bringing that back to what you said about blockchain, which in my mini futurist eye is where we will get change. I do research on the side, and one of the things I'm finding, particularly with young people in Nigeria, is that every opportunity to sidestep the government and its corruption and its bureaucracy, they take it. So the reason they are moving into the digital economy to build wealth, drawn to crypto to save and edge their savings, is because they're trying to avoid the problems that we know of. Will they be able to build technologies that will lock everybody in to trust each other and get things going outside of the government? I think we're going to have a fight back. And when you go back to things like sovereign individuals, like the ones you mentioned in the history of the US, people who are bigger than governments, it's, in my view, going to be slightly challenging to get to that point overnight, because I see a convergence in Africa of the political elite and the business elite. They are working together in such a way that it's difficult to see how to break their hold on governance. And so what I hope for is the emergence of one or two who will call the group to order at some point, say, let's get this done. And it's happening gradually. So Cyril in South Africa was a business leader before he came to government. I'm not sure how well he's doing because I'm not very close to the action, but we've just brought in one here in Nigeria. Our current president had some business record and seems to understand the rule of the road. These are early days, but I hope, and this is just hope, that people like that can recognize the need to build bigger prosperity and connect the dots, that a prosperous Africa is easier for them to milk than a troublesome one. So if that gets into them at some point, we might be able to get on the right road or the right track to making prosperity widespread in Africa. Because clearly the road we are on right now is not working, and they know it's not working. It's just that they probably feel and think that they are incapacitated to do something about it. And that's where innovation comes in. So we talk about, I think Arila and I, a couple of days back, were talking about the governance innovations. That's one of the things that I am focused on also here in Nigeria with GIMI. How can we bring innovation into governance, into making sure that public goods and services are delivered the most efficient way to as many people who need it as possible? Because that's the bedrock of building prosperity and getting security and peace relatively. So,
yeah. I like that you're saying that, because you know, I think part of the problem we have politically all over the world right now is, you know, and this relates to the business leaders. Businesses deliver us what we need. If they're in e-business, especially, they deliver us what we need. They know who we are. They know what we want. The government can't do that. And I think we're reaching a tipping point with governments to say, look at Estonia. My wife just went through getting a new driver's license where we are, and it was a terrible experience trying to just take your old license, hand it to them, get a new driver's license. Nothing's online. You got to stand in these long lines. You have rude employees that don't really want to help you. And so I think this is where countries like Nigeria have a really great advantage, is to just jump over some of that 20th century government technology to 21st century government technology, and have more stable, more predictable, more efficient governments than other places. Because that's what I think people are tired of, is they see what's possible with the commercial applications, but then they look at their government and they say, my government is so behind the times. They're still operating in 1980 instead of 2024. And so I think every country like Nigeria has a real opportunity to leapfrog over a lot of established democracies, a lot of established governments, simply because they don't have to get mired down in a lot of these bureaucratic procedures that people are frankly tired of.
Great, Brett. I'm going to let Irila say something because I think Irila and Akin are working together to use innovation as the way to maybe address some of the challenges. So, Irila, what is it that you and Akin are working on to bring innovation to Nigeria?
We are working on different levels, but just to cover a little bit on the point of Brett and Akin as well for the government innovation. What we are trying to push, and what we as GIMI did even last year, was service innovation, right? So we were working closely with Qatar government on building this citizen journey maps, or customer journeys, basically in the business language, from the service provider and from the citizen provider, to understand what are the pain points in each of the services. And we did an exercise which was like any services that the government offers for birth, for marriage, for divorce, for death, which are like, let's say, journeys that everybody in his or her life experience. So, and we went through this and we found out what were the pain points. We're using an efficient software on this. From the service provider and citizen, and we understood that there were different themes. Some of the services weren't integrated, so you had to go to different ministries for one basically document. Some were not digitalized, some you need to wait in lines, and all these kind of different kind of issues, which we were basically bucketing those into fix this now, basically incremental innovation, and some needed breakthrough innovation. And for the breakthrough ones, basically, we needed to go to the hackathon. They found this very insightful, in the sense of they never, as service provider, they came together to think about these issues, right? Some of those they knew, some of those basically were issues which were triggered while working with other colleagues in other ministries, basically. So this is important. The business, as Brett said, they do this a lot. They are more experienced in doing customer journeys, how to make it more effective, how to make a client more satisfied, and all this. But governments, they don't do this usually. They sometimes do it when they have elections, or they need to make the services more efficient, the citizens more satisfied. So I think this is an approach that every government should deploy, basically. And this is what we were doing with Akin, and how we can push this, the government, local government and central government, to do this more.
Good. So look, certainly governments can innovate and become better. So again, we're talking about the government of Nigeria or any other government doing these kind of things. And I think Akin is talking about that. But also there's a understanding that the governance we have in organizations, the corporations, may be a little bit better for building trust. But even there, we see corruption and we see all kinds of stuff breaking down. So you got to be really careful that you build a society of trust somehow to be able to do things faster, quicker, and better. So trust is the name of the game, probably for innovation as much as anything that we're going to do in life. Akin, we only have about 5 more minutes, so I want to make sure we use your time wisely. I have one question for you. What do the Chinese and the Indians know that the Europeans and Americans don't know? Because clearly they are arriving in large numbers, investing huge dollars in Africa and also in South America. And they seem to have managed the governance and the trust issue better, while the Europeans and the Americans run away from it for some reason, saying we don't know, and so we aren't going to do it, or not do it as much. So just your thoughts.
I wish I were Chinese or Indian.
You don't know the answer.
So, but I'll just tell you my observation. So 3 years ago, I started doing a study. Every time I fly around Nigeria, I'm looking in the plane. And I can tell you, for the last 3 years that I've started this informal study, proxy study, on each flight to whichever part of Nigeria, and I do travel to almost everywhere there's an airport, there is always a Chinese, one or two, going into the most unlikely of places in Nigeria. So I started asking myself the same question you asked. What is it that they see that I don't see? And I'm Nigerian. I've lived here all my life. And I know, yes, we're a potentially rich nation, which has not actualized this potential fully. So what are they doing? I realized that, so unlike when Europeans and Americans come in and they're building big plans, big ideas, they come in small. Try to understand the technologies that people are working with. Try to understand where the markets are for whatever it is that they have capacities for back home in China or India, and they just get their hands dirty building from scratch. I've seen that. So when they are more comfortable, they start to buy up small companies and then expand from there. So I think they have an organic approach to how they build. I would also not discount the fact that some of them I have the backing of their governments to do this, which you probably might not have unless it's on a huge project scale for Europe or America, right? So I think they do that organic growth and that organic approach to market entry than any other thing else. And because they know what is possible and they are coming from large countries also, they know that every little thing that starts small in a country of 200 million would definitely hit it big. Now, in terms of the governance, I think their governance infrastructure is not too distant from ours. And so they can negotiate the nuances of the culture much better than the Europeans and the Americans. And I'm going to just say that so that we don't go into other things that are involved in the things that I just said, right? So they're okay. I think somebody is saying something.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Okay, so I think they are able to negotiate the context in that wise because our governance is not, so our level of governance and what we can do and not do is not too far from each other. And they are closer to us in that wise. And so I think that also enables them to embed themselves more easily in our context.
In very lot of insights that we got today. Look, Nigeria is growing rapidly. It's got a great educated population to tap into. It's got a diaspora which is around the world. It's emerging, exploring, whatever. And in there, fintech and education and any other thing which are basic needs, Nigeria's got a large population to absorb that. On the other side, they can also produce solutions and push solutions inside Africa, into South Africa and neighboring countries. This is a country which is creating probably the most number of billionaires as a number because of the size of the country, and nobody else is going in there. So the local indigenous entrepreneurs are many, and you're seeing all these things happening. So the advice to everybody who's listening in, you can be on the sidelines and watch and then say, we heard Akin's presentation and I should have, but I didn't. or you reach out to Akin and say, let's go, let's do something fun, let's go change the world, let's make a big impression. So Akin, with that, I'm going to give you the last minute for whatever you want to say, and we wrap up.
All right. At some point, I saw a hand up. I think I saw Solomon's hand up. I don't know if he still wants to say something. I'll give you 30 seconds of my 1 minute.
Oh, okay, you go ahead. I think I was actually wanted to add up to what the strategy Chinese people used to also do in Ghana here. So I think you wrap up and let us go. I think.
All right. Thanks. So I want to say thank you to everyone for listening to me. I hope it's been useful in terms of giving you some taste of what's possible. I believe that the other sectors of the tech ecosystem are still greenfields that can be tapped into. The work that we want to do, and we are committed ourselves to in Nigeria, is to democratize innovation. So in the last set of weeks that I've become certified, I've been saying to people in Nigeria, look, let's move innovation from just being a buzzword to value. And I use this analogy. I say there's a method to the madness of innovation. So if you want to do it right, you want to get sustainable innovation portfolios, I'm saying to Nigerians, yes, let's do this. And we are always looking for collaboration. Like Arila said, I'm always in conversation with her. Look, what's working in Colombia? What's working in Brazil? Yes, it might be a bit different in terms of context, but how do I contextualize it and make sure that it works? And so, yes, our doors are open. I'll be waiting to hear from you all so we can take this game to the next level. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.